Good morning, good morning, good morning. My name is Adenike Huggins, and I'm Senior Director of Education Policy and Advocacy at the National Urban League. And I am very pleased to welcome you all here this morning for our convening focused on building will for education equity. So before we get into our program, I'd like to hear where folks are from. I'll start with myself. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, but I'd like to hear where we have represented in the room. Cincinnati, Louisiana, Greenville, South Carolina, Columbus, Ohio, Lorain County, Ohio, Omaha, Nebraska, Louisville, Kentucky, Hartford, Connecticut, Atlanta, Georgia. Is that Atlanta proper or? All right, all right, all right, all right. No, I was okay, okay. It's too early. It's too early. She lives in Atlanta. That's my colleague. That- that's Metro, the Atlanta metro area, right? I know. We josh a lot of in the office. That's my colleague Adia. Uh, but yeah, it's great to have everyone here. I think this is going to be a very powerful convening. So I'm really happy that you all took us up on the offer and the opportunity to join us here. And so, with that, I would like to introduce our Senior Vice President of Education, Youth Development, Health, and Quality of Life, Mr. Hal Smith.
Thank you, Adenike, and good morning, colleagues. So many of you I don't know and hope to meet today. So many folks I've met over the last 6 months, 6 years, 14 years of being here at the National Urban League. Want to make sure we thank Adenike and Simone in particular for their leadership in bringing us all together. This is going to be a fantastic day. I hope you had a fantastic night here in the hotel. What we want to do today is spend some time hearing from teams across the country who are executing a series of plans, but something we called initially the building of public will and changing the narratives. That there were conversations going on in any number of urban league communities that were targeting this thing or that thing, but weren't necessarily building towards change, building towards meaningful impact, not because their ideas were wrong or their approaches were wrong, but simply because there's another narrative out there that we weren't acknowledging. There's a conversation happening about how terrible things are and how it cannot be overcome easily. And instead, we wanted to talk about the power of coalition, the power of work, that folks coming together was better than trying to do this ourselves, but more importantly, the power of coalition means we're focused on building will, building agency, building voice, and not just howling into the wind, right? That there are things we can do to build towards better success. That's the work of the Equity and Excellence Project. For those of you who don't know, this is a project we began 12 years ago now, focused on how to build an initiative across the Urban League movement, all affiliates, all communities, working together to solve problems. In the before times, before COVID, we would do these large convenings a few times a year. We hope to get back to that in the future. But our real hope is that we can see these conversations where they don't exist in your communities, and even more importantly, accelerate them when they do, help them grow where they already exist. We are not under the impression that this is something brand new in many of your communities, but it's an opportunity to gather folks together, perhaps with a little bit more intention and a little bit more support. We acknowledge that the subgrants and the funding we provide are inadequate for all the complex work that you're doing. This is meant to seed that, and if people can understand that you're doing great work, that you have a track record, you can attract additional local and state funding while still being connected to a national conversation. Our role is to provide that kind of support, to provide data analysis, data presentations, connect you with people who are specialists. You know, we don't claim to be able to do everything at the National Urban League. We claim that we can connect you to people who know how to do these things. Friends that we've made over the years, colleagues that we made over the years, and introductions that we need to make ourselves because their work is so important to the kinds of things you want to get accomplished in your communities. Unfortunately, I have to leave before we close today, but wanted to make sure you understood that this is us on an on-ramp for what we hope to accomplish in 23 and 24. That we will have larger convenings, we will have targeted convenings. We have an idea of what's necessary to accomplish this work, but it's much more important that we hear from you as to what you need. The EEP has six or seven? Seven focus areas, see? 7 focus areas that we came up with over the years, started with 5, now it's 7, that these are issues, these are concerns that you have, ways of working that are top of mind in your community, right? So what we did is not say, here's the one thing every Urban League affiliate needs to work on. We said, here are 7 things that matter in improving student outcomes, and one of these is likely to be top of mind in your community. And top of mind is those things. If you're not talking about their closing a historically black high school, if you come around here talking about anything else, we're not listening. If you're talking about violence in our communities, we can't have an educational conversation because this is the thing that's driving us here. And if you can acknowledge that something is happening in your community and have folks convene around that, think about that, you can take them to other places. But starting in the same place is not our goal. Our goal is to help you start where you are, again, to accelerate and grow if you're already underway, but not to have one national message. That is unlikely to be successful in 91 affiliates across 36 states, plus Washington, D.C. We believe in better student outcomes. We believe in focusing on children of the African diaspora, students and families of the African diaspora, but anyone who is similarly situated in public education. We are here to defend public education, but we are also here to critique and push our way to better student outcomes. You can do both at the same time. So with that, I will turn over the program to Alex Reyes, Vice President in our Equitable Justice group. One thing that we're trying to do is to connect an advocacy, an engagement, a policy structure across all of our areas. So EEP is tied to education. Equitable justice will have an approach. Health will have an approach. But that they're all grounded in the same thing, providing opportunities for people to come together, supporting our CEOs as our most important voices, and supporting policy leads and others from the community who are doing great work and perhaps need a different foundation on which to stand. But that's our work. And I thank you for coming together this morning. And Alex.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Reyes, Vice President for Equitable Justice, the National Urban League. Our offices are headquartered in New York. Many of you I know, some of you I don't yet, but it's a pleasure to be here. Hal, thank you for having me. Adenike, thank you for walking 5 feet over to my desk to say you got to come on Friday. And but I'm happy to be here. For those who don't know, the Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives Division is a brand new division of the National Urban League. It's about 2 years old now, created in the spirit of the social justice uprising of 2020 in direct response to the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the unfortunate legacy of similar murders in our community, as well as a galvanizing force, to be a galvanizing force on the state and local level to achieve the policy results that might not be achievable on a federal level. So often we get caught up in what Congress is doing or what's happening or not happening in DC, and we forget that we have state governors and state legislators and municipal bodies who can get things done in the near term while we also continue the work in the long term in Congress. So I want to touch on something that Hal said. I'm not going to take up too much of your time, but building will with intention. That is what I grabbed from what Hal started us off with, and I really appreciate that because so much of what we do, equitable justice and strategic initiatives, that strategy component is where we build in the intention behind our policy initiatives. In order to sort of explain what we do, I want to break down our portfolio, but also talk about, I'll just say this, coalition work is the only reason why we can be effective in our work. Right? Building partnerships, reaching out to folks is the only way that we can be effective. There's a saying that I often think about is that I can get much further walking with you than carrying you, right? And so we're looking for folks who we can walk and march and climb with. So the equitable justice and strategic initiatives are broken up basically into two main components. It's our research, policy, and advocacy side, and that's what we think of as the equitable justice side. And then it's the strategic initiatives, that's the convenings, the activations, and the events. And none of that stuff on both sides. Neither of those sides can function without partnership. Our policy and initiative framework is in two main buckets. That's criminal justice reform and police accountability. But also in the other bucket, big bucket, is civic engagement, voting, and protecting democracy. Now, those two concepts are very big and broad. And so this is how they break down for us. In the middle there is just a short list of our coalition partnerships. But I want to talk about what each of our buckets are. So in the criminal justice and police accountability bucket, we're working on, in the criminal justice side, parole reform, bail reform, sentencing advocacy, right? Community intervention systems. So that's how communities respond as an alternative to policing, right? Then we think about our policing accountability work, right? Because in lots of our communities, what we're faced with is a conundrum oftentimes where we have police departments who feel as though they're an occupying force in some instances, in some communities, but also when we need help, that's who we're going to. So we put ourselves in this position. So how can we feel safe in our communities with community intervention, but also with a responsive police department that involves community support? Obviously, that's going to require coalition building. Also, our reentry work for the formerly incarcerated or justice impacted, which includes a brand new expungement project that we're launching in communities, expunging records to help lift the barriers to the various resources and opportunities that the National Urban League offers, from education to health to employment to housing and so on and so forth. In our protecting democracy space, we're working right now in the middle of our Reclaim Your Vote campaign, which is a ground campaign that's text banking, canvassing, texting, reaching out to folks. We were just in Atlanta and in Columbus, Georgia, talking to folks about the importance of voting and hearing from them about how they're feeling about the election. I'm going to share a story from one conversation I had with an older gentleman who happened to just flag us down to ask what we were doing in a neighborhood. because a curious neighbor is a good neighbor, I think. And so we gladly, me and President Mark Morial, went over to him, and we learned that he was 75 years old. He didn't know if he was registered to vote or not. Thankfully, our campaign had built a online portal where you can type in your information, basic information, name, address, figure out right there on the spot if you're registered or not. That portal was built in coalition with a larger another organization, When We All Vote, who built that portal in coordination with Vote.org. That portal and similar portals are being used across several organizations that are similarly situated who want to build outreach and build partnership to get folks the information that they need. So this gentleman didn't know if he was registered, and he believed that he wasn't actually. Turns out that he was, but there was a flag on his registration. He had been justice involved, and his registration was paused, so to speak. He needed to reapply in order to get his registration reactivated. He didn't know that he was eligible for that, right? He actually thought that he was ineligible. So we told him, here's what you have to do. We handed him a palm card, had steps, and he pulls us to the side and he says, I don't read too good. So he couldn't read what was on the card. So now, this means that this eligible voter needs to be held and walked to where he needs to go. I'm from New York, right? I can't do that with him. And I can't do that with everyone everywhere. But because we build coalitions on the ground, we have folks on the ground who know where the polling places are, who know where to get the information that I don't know how to get. And so we set him up with the next steps and the next steps so that he knows who's on the ballot. Somebody can read it to him. Who can go to the polling place with him? Because you can prepare him, but once he's in that booth and he's on his own, he still cannot understand who's on the paper. So who can get with him in that booth? That's coalition building. We get a person who's 75, has never voted before, didn't know that he was eligible to vote, connect him with someone, a local partner, who can walk him step by step through the process and have him execute his vote, to re-engage in the voter franchise, right? In the South. In an election, that means the difference between everything, right? Not just for Georgians, but for the rest of the country and potentially the world, right? Coalitions feel small oftentimes because we're sitting at a table talking about something, but it's a butterfly effect, right? And I could talk through more and more of what we do here, but I would take the whole day, because within each of these buckets, in each of the buckets of work that you do, you're touching various folks, and the butterfly effect continues. That is what coalition building is. So I was brought here merely to just give an example, outside of maybe the education example, right, of how coalitions work. And obviously you know this because you've been doing this, and this is what you do day in and day out. But just wanting to be able to highlight for folks the important work that's happening within the Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives Division, but also the way that the National Urban League is thinking as a whole. Because we are not an independent body. We work in collaboration and coordination, because oftentimes, and this is where I'll close, the hands that we touch when we're on the ground, and I'll be in Philly next weekend, the hands that I touch at some point could connect to the work that you're doing. Can and probably will connect to the work that Hal and Adenike are doing, right? When I go to Rochester, because the family of Daniel Prude are still dealing with the repercussions of police killing their family member. That comes back with me, and I get to talk to my colleagues about how we can coalition build around public education, around securing more teachers that are representative of our neighborhoods, to help support these families and the external effects of what's going on around them. So I'm here merely to just say that. I'll be here for a little bit longer, but thank you again for having me. Coalitions are how we get forward, how we move together, and happy to talk after. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. Really appreciate that that context setting, because I think that, as you definitely emphasize, the coalitions are important. And even in the story that you told about the person, who was unable to read, right, that impacts our work. And so I think from a national level to what we're doing at a local level, it's important to recognize that we need to have multi-sector coalitions, right? All the presentations that you're gonna hear today are situated in education, but they are impacting everything else, all parts of life, all parts of the way that we interact with each other, the way that opportunities are opened or closed. And so the importance really of this work and this particular grant is elevating the work of multi-sector coalitions. So I'd like to invite you to do a brief thought experiment before we get into our first presentation. So let's think back to 2019. This is pre-pandemic, or BC, before Corona. And we had an opportunity through the Hewlett Foundation to, as Hal said, really elevate public will. What does building public will look like as sort of a next step for our EEP work? One of the prime ways that we organize ourselves within the EEP work is to do stakeholder circles. And those are opportunities to elevate locally resonant issues with folks in the community. What do people care about? What can people kind of galvanize around? And so you might have a parent, you might have a teacher, you might have specific individuals that you invite to these kinds of conversations. And so this opportunity was for us to sort of take that to the next level. What does it look like when we go past the stakeholder circles and actually work to build out coalitions? And so the first 3 affiliates that we funded to do this work were the Knoxville Area Urban League, the Urban League of Nebraska, and the Urban League of Greater Atlanta. And so they went on their way. They're working with their school districts, they're developing their coalitions, they're figuring out what are the issues that folks are most concerned about. What can we really galvanize some support and some strength around? 2019 is, we're going, everything is moving. We have some visits scheduled at the beginning of 2020. We go to Nebraska in 2020. We go to a series of robust community meetings with the police chief, the fire chief. We were like, oh, this is amazing. Like, we look at the power of the coalitions. And then in February, this is like late February of 2020, we went to Atlanta and we met with the CEO, and we went to APS, Atlanta Public Schools, and we learned about what their focus and their initiative was going to be, which was around the race to read. They had marketing campaigns. They were going to do bus wraps, bus shelter wraps, all of these things. And then the pandemic happened. So because this work was very outward facing, when everything shut down, including the schools, and went to remote work, it really hindered and hampered the efforts of what folks were doing. And so obviously Hewlett was understanding, as most of us are understanding, as to what the limitations were with that particular initiative. But they provided an opportunity again for us to work to continue this work. And so in this iteration, we have the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio, the Urban League of Louisiana, and the Urban League of Greater Cleveland. And so this is really an opportunity for us to celebrate the success of this particular project coming to completion and all of the work that they have done over the last 18 months. So I'm excited to introduce our first presentation and our first presenter, Ms. Jasmine Costin, who is the Vice President of Government and Community Relations at the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio. So thank you so much, Jasmine. Come on.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm proud to serve as the Vice President of Government and Community Relations for the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio, which involves the Dayton market as well as the Cincinnati market. So I'm really excited to share with you what we've been working on when it comes to educational equity. Our policy work, and I lead our policy work at ULGSO, and it is housed in our Center for Social Justice. But a little background, our vision at the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio is vibrant communities with thriving individuals, families, and businesses. And our mission is to transform generations by promoting personal empowerment and economic self-sufficiency. We have kind of two ways that we go about that, community leadership and financial empowerment. And so I just wanted to kind of give you that context. Sorry about that. I'm going backwards. Ooh, sorry. But I wanted to kind of talk to you about the model that we have at our Center for Social Justice, where kind of policy is. Our model is based on three things and how they inform one another. So we deal with advocacy, and we want to build relationships with key stakeholders. We want to equip our network with the skills and knowledge of processes and systems, because we know that traditionally we've been excluded from those processes and systems. And we want to develop targeted asks based on our experiences and our data. And of course, that data is a part of it, because we need those hard numbers and those facts to guide and inform our work and reform our work in decision making. And we want data transparency to lead to accountability. Right? We need to know what's going on and how it's happening. And then the third, but equally as important, sometimes maybe the most important, is that organizing pillar. And organizing is about building power, it's about building trust, and it's about building community. And that's kind of the context that I want to bring here today, because our public will, building public will, was about building public will, but it was more so about building that trust with our Black caregiver network, building community with our stakeholders, and building power for all of us. Our goal in education equity is to create a system of accountability that amplifies Black caregivers. We use the term caregiver and not parent, because parent is not a nimble enough category, right? We know that in Black households, it could be grandma, it could be auntie, it could be neighbor, it could be whomever. And so we didn't want to use these terms that are just thrown around in education as a one size fits all. We wanted to be really clear that if you are giving care to a student, that's who you are. And so we wanted to amplify those voices and measure what matters to them, giving them the tools and the power to hold the system accountable and elect candidates aligned with their values. Our goal was to show you are a stakeholder, whether you are seen that way or not, and what can we do as the Urban League to show the community and to make sure that they understand that you actually are and engage you as such. More about advocacy, accountability, and activation. We wanted to, in the end, activate our parents. So taking them from a space where education was happening to them and to their students, to where they were active participants and things were happening and they were co-creating things. So our organizing model, we hired an organizer who was amazing, Kelly Dukes. She actually was offered another position by the DCCC because of the work that she had been doing. And they were like, we see that she's doing amazing. And so we were like, that's great, wonderful. But I'll talk to you about how we did this model. We did about 200 one-on-ones not just with caregivers, but with other stakeholders in education, business owners, staff in schools, school board members. We created a Black caregiver network to go from the individual to the group. And then when we worked with community partnerships, we engaged everyone in education that we could. We then even went to in-school support. And our in-school support looked like Kelly, who was a former teacher, going into third grade classes because we knew that pickup and drop off were the times when caregivers would be there, so she needed to be in the classroom. She also got to know the kids because the best way to build trust with parents is for them to understand we care about your children, we care about your students, we care about your young people. We also offered support when parents came to us. For instance, we had a parent who was blind who said, I keep receiving text messages as my only form of communication from school. So we knew that that was an issue, and we had, Kelly would go to the school and say, hey, this doesn't work. Who do we talk to? And would sit with parents when they were experiencing things like that, and then be the liaison when they spoke with administration, because administration knew us because of the conversations and relationships that we built with them. So from there, it was like we were the intermediary so that the parents could walk into that meeting not feeling like they were going to an authority figure, but going to an equal. I am here as an expert of my experience and my students' experience, and you are the expert in the education that you provide. But it's not this hierarchical dynamic. So our Black Caregiver Network. These are some of our parents, and you see they have our t-shirts on. Through all of the things that we talked to parents with, we wanted to come up with, what is our issue? What is your issue, guys? What do you want to talk about? And what kept coming up to us was that they want to be seen, heard, and valued. They had not been engaged by districts and educational leaders in a way that invited them to be stakeholders. They were talked at, they were not talked to, they were dictated to, they just felt very powerless. And so the lack of access to power uncovered the need for this. We realized, what are we gonna do? There isn't one issue, the issue is the way that you're being engaged. So what happened was we co-created this space for them to be, and we started meeting twice a month. The first meeting was a meeting where, sometimes it was just commiserating about, I'm sick of my school. But we recognized that type of active listening and the ability for them to come together and say those things was building trust with us as the Urban League, but also among each other. And then the second meeting that we had each month was a time for us to really say, okay, what are we gonna do about it? We've talked about how we feel, but how are we gonna move forward? And that was usually with a smaller group of parents, of course, that we ended up calling our parent leadership team. And that team would say, all right, these are the things that have happened, these are the things that I've heard, and this is how we're gonna move forward. We want to develop a survey, we want to do all of these things. So those were the ways that we kind of engaged. Conducted over 200 one-on-one conversations. They had a survey that went to 4 different schools. We focused in on 4 different schools in CPS because we knew we couldn't cover the entire amount, but we got 187 responses. And the parents were the ones who came up with the survey. The parents were the ones who were going to their fellow parents and taking the survey. And so it was really a wonderful way to see that the parents, the narrative that we usually hear is Black parents aren't doing enough. They're not doing this, they're not doing that. We're always hear about how they're not showing up. They showed up for this. They were the ones doing this. And that was important to me because when they say that Black parents aren't doing anything, it's like, well, what does that mean? Most of the schools are Black students. So what are you really saying? And so that was an important narrative for us to change. So these are also, because we also were during the time of, not post-COVID, but after lockdown, I don't know how we're like calling all of these things. We were still not fully outside, let's say that. So we did a lot of engagement online, which was a barrier. It was difficult. People are tired of Zoom. They were tired of Zoom in 2021, right? But we still had parents who were showing up twice a month, and we had different things for them. Like I said, we had parent roundtables. We had conversations with people in education. We had action assemblies. What happened in January of 2021 was the district was about to go completely maskless and completely back to school. And people were like, excuse me? So the district had a meeting and the Black Caregiver Network had a meeting. And at our meeting, we decided like that doesn't work. So we went to the school board meeting en masse, and we had parents signing up to speak, and they talked and gave their feelings. Some of these parents had never been to a school board meeting before, right? Not even in person. But now online, they signed up, and they talked about how it wasn't good for them. They had done the research, right? They had talked to one another. And the district decided, all right, we'll have a mask mandate. We'll see how it goes. But it changed things. And we realized after that particular meeting and the way that was going, that we were building public will because we started getting calls. Now, I worked at the city. I had a lot of relationships with local elected officials. So I started getting calls on my personal cell phone like, so I hear the Urban League has parents. This is the president of the school board. I want some of them on my advisory committee. Oh, do you now? But that was really exciting because we recognized that the word was out, that our parents were showing up as experts, that we knew that they were, and that they were being now called on to advise the president of the school board. That was a win. So we had events. We went places. We shared our message far and wide. When we got outside in the summer, we went to those things. And one of our important partners was our local coffee shop, a Black-owned coffee shop. Everybody goes there. Everybody's there. Everyone from the mayor to, the parents. And we would have things there. We would show up with our cups and our T-shirts and just talk to people and say, hey, have a cup of coffee with me. Tell me what's going on with your student. Tell me what's important in your educational life. Tell me how you feel as a caregiver. And these things were exciting, and it was exciting to be able to build that in our community for us, by us, making sure that whenever we had something, we would have it there because that's Black-owned. When we had catering, it was a Black-owned caterer. These are the ways that we would engage and do the work of the Urban League through this initiative. So, in coming through our top caregiver concerns, it was, what are the things that matter to you? Understanding school politics. As I said in the beginning, a lot of us have been historically excluded from politics, feeling like we are politically astute, feeling like our votes matter, our words matter, our candidates matter, etc. So we wanted to talk about what that looked like. What are the school politics? School culture. We wanted schools, our caregivers wanted schools that were free of bias, and they wanted culturally responsive teaching. And then parental engagement. We wanted better relationships between themselves and school staff, and we wanted the schools to redefine engagement. Sorry. We wanted schools to redefine engagement because the way that many of our parents felt, and I'm a young mom, I felt this way too. If you're not baking cookies and showing up, then they don't feel like you're engaged, and they don't validate that engagement. So that became the heart of kind of what we wanted to do, was how do we redefine engagement to include Black caregivers and the way that we're able to be engaged? So those were our focus issues around parental engagement, because we kept coming back to that. We kept coming back to, I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard, I don't feel valued. Along that, we started coalition building, and the president of the school board reached out to us and said, there is a Don't Say Gay bill. You've heard about those in other states. It came to Ohio as well. And they said, hey, we want you to join with us to write a letter opposing House Bill 616, which was the Don't Say Gay bill. And this was the first time that we got to build with GLSEN. And that was really exciting for me because you know, I had heard people say things whenever Pride would come around. What is the Urban League doing? You know, how does the Urban League feel about Pride? And I'm like, how do we feel about Pride? What is that even a question? But this was our opportunity, right? This was an opportunity to do something to show that we're for equality. We're empowering people. We want thriving communities and neighborhoods, as I said in the beginning, and that includes us all. So we wrote it, and what I put on here was that we included the language of our caregivers. Sorry, I'm not doing well with the clicker. I included the language of our caregivers in the bill. It says schools need to be places where students feel seen, heard, and valued for who they are. And schools also need to help students learn how to work alongside people who have different backgrounds and experiences. From that letter, we, as the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio, were asked by GLSEN to walk with them in the Pride Parade. That was the first time we had ever walked in a Pride Parade in Cincinnati, which was huge. When we walked and we were holding our banner and we were right there with GLSEN and we, you know, were decked out, as you can see, in all of our cool Pride gear, seeing the faces of the Black folks in that parade, watching us walk down, it almost brought me to tears, because I thought, how beautiful it is to be seen by the Urban League in this space. How beautiful it is. This is much bigger than just a partnership. This is what building coalition looks like. This is what it looks like to show up for all of the ways that we exist. Other partners that we have: Cincinnati Public Schools, School Board School, which is a professional development program that equips people who want to run. We had 2 of our Black caregivers graduate from that program. GLSEN, of course. Cohere, which is an organization in Cincinnati that is about bringing, they believe that the people who are closest to the problem, of course, have the best answer. And so they are whenever we have something, they organize to get folks there and vice versa. Cradle to Career, Cincinnati NAACP, and the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers. So these are just some of the educational partners that we have. So again, talking about being seen, heard, and valued, and really we went from just what does that feel like to our caregivers to what does that actually look like. So when I come in the classroom or when I come into the school, I want to feel welcome. I want to feel that this school community is free of judgment and it's understanding of my individual circumstances, whether it's positive or negative, right? I want to feel valued. I want to be included in the decision-making process on the school level, but also beyond that. I don't want to just find out what's happening at the budget meeting. I want to know what's going on. And then I want to hear heard that the policies are consistent across the district. So at this school and that school and that school, we're not talking about 3 different things. Let it be consistent. And we want to feel a part of the community with more attention given to positive caregiver behavior rather than what's not happening. Because that was also a big thing that came up in COVID was, oh, there are so many Black children who are not logging on and we're so worried about them and what's going on and why are they not able to do this, that, and the other? Well, what about the ones who were? Right? There's always this hyper focus on what's lacking, not on the assets in our communities, and we wanted to change that. So we developed a toolkit that we were going to release to our district, right? Usually a toolkit is released to us. We're going to give it to you because there's some things you need to understand about us. And so inside this toolkit is our data. So we talk about the survey that we conducted and what came out of that, which I'll show you in just a moment. Our why, which came straight from the caregivers of what exactly are we doing. And then we developed a spectrum of engagement that we gave to our board members that showed that we want the teachers, administrators to understand that baking cookies and being the classroom parent is not the only way that people show up, that it is indeed a spectrum, and that at any point throughout the year, I could be at any part of this spectrum, but it's all valid. And then what our asks were. They came up with specific asks of the district. So this is kind of the branding for our Black Caregiver Network toolkit. and it gives our why, talks about the organizing that we've done, because that's what's powerful when you talk about political dynamics. People want to know, what does your base look like? Who are the people that follow you? Do you even have a critical mass? That's why we wanted them to know. Oh yeah. And they saw at that meeting. We specified what we do: community organizing, public awareness campaigns, and caregiver support. And then again, we laid out exactly what it feels like. And this one is really important. When caregivers want to be seen, that there is an overwhelming belief that caregivers love their children and want them to succeed. I have heard so many negative things about, these parents don't X, Y, or Z about their children. And that was one of the things that we all came to a really clear and quick consensus about. Was we were going from the belief that every single parent loves their child and wants the best for their child, right? Now, circumstances may cause behaviors to look a little interesting, but if we come from the idea that everything that is happening from a caregiver on behalf of their child is because of the love that they have and the desire for them to succeed, you're going to have a completely different hypothesis about why that behavior is happening, right? This was also important. We had in the toolkit that we understand that there are caregivers in survival mode. And we're not talking about survival mode, right? If you're in survival mode, if you are in a deep level of trauma, you may not fall on this spectrum. Your children may not come to school ready to learn. Your children may not be at school. There may be a whole bunch of things coming on, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about caregivers who are not in that space, but we also are providing help for them if they are in this space of survival mode. And we said survival mode because we're not going to throw them away and say, oh, they're just bad parents. They're not. Circumstances are causing them to have to focus on surviving, and that puts us all in a different space. So acknowledging that was also really important to our network. We wanted to move, the spectrum of engagement was seeking to move the mindset of the district from traditional to transformative, because we know that we're not included in traditional ideas and definitions of what good parenting and education look like. The spectrum seeks to move away from individual caregivers or teachers' job to a shared responsibility, moving away from events-driven engagement to results-driven engagement, moving away from inconsistent top-down policies to community-driven, sustainable policies. And here's our spectrum. So we go from an informed parent, invested parent, an involved parent, an interactive parent, an interested and then invested parent. And this is what it looks like. Informed is a caregiver who's well informed about the school teachers, but they may not be able to be present within the school community. This information should be presented to them in a clear, consistent way. School districts should share information in a variety of ways, including calendar invites and direct communication. So at the top, you'll see this is what the parent is and this is what they look like. And then it's an example of how you communicate best with this parent and ways to engage them best. So then when you look on the other end of the spectrum to an invested, this is the parent that is going to attend the board meetings, that is going to be in the community meetings. And these parents need opportunities to directly connect with board members. So it shows that at any space, these are the best ways to engage that parent, to validate their engagement as well. This data is about kinship and grandship families, because in Ohio, we realize that a lot of caregivers are, again, not parents, not biological parents. And so because of that, we wanted to make sure that we were showing you have to expand this. It's not this, nuclear family that is the norm, quote unquote. Our families look different. Your families clearly also look different. And so we need for you to validate that as well. So our survey was a 3-question survey because we knew that parents were tired of taking 50, 60 question surveys, and that's why they weren't getting a good response. We did 3 questions. We had a QR code. We would show up at drop-off. We would show up at pickup time, and you could do it on your phone. Simple questions. We got 187 responses. First question, do you feel welcome in your child's school? Valued. This is the value part. Are you valued? This should not be this close, as we know. Have you attended the most recent parent-teacher conference night or school family night? If not, what was the biggest barrier? This was beautiful data because our parents were pretty much there, even though that's not the narrative we see. We also see that the times of the conferences are between 2:45 and 5:45. So I can tell you at the Urban League, I was not making those conferences. I was doing other work, right? We see how many had said that there was no virtual option, that there was a lack of transportation, a lack of childcare. So our parents weren't being seen, literally because they weren't even being looked for. And then how often have you seen your child's principal interacting? 77 said never. Can you imagine going to a school and never seeing your principal as a parent? How do you feel heard that way? And can you imagine when you have seen them that it's because of a behavior issue or something that's happened with your student? So that's your only interaction. So this data was, again, really important. And then we came to our asks. We want our district to fully adopt and implement the Black Caregiver Network Spectrum of Engagement. We want their engagement director as well as each school building to understand the ways in which they can best connect with parents. We know that if they connect with all parents this way, that this is going to be a tide that lifts all boats. We understand that. We hope that they do. We want CPS to redesign their parent-teacher conference model and adopt an all-day parent-teacher conference day where caregivers are able to schedule a conference at any time during the day, including a virtual option if desired. And then the biggest thing that came up, which was very interesting from a number of our parents who were on the LSDMCs, which are the local school decision-making committees, they wanted them to redesign the principal selection process. They realized, because they were in those meetings now and they had the information, that this is not very equitable, and we want to see the full list of candidates. What was happening in CPS was that they would send 2 or 3 principals to a school. There's a whole list of people who are eligible, but they would just send 3 to a school and say, this is who you have to choose from. They said, no, we want all of the choices. We want to see more. We want to be a part of it. And then the district would choose which candidates would get interviews. And they said, no, we want to be a part of that, which I was like, okay, parents, go ahead. I love it. But it goes to show you, when given the information and given the care and being respected as experts, what our parents can do. Here are more pictures of the work that we've done, our partners, us having fun with one another, connecting. And then in August, I got a letter and we won an award for our work. Thank you. Our work was recognized by the STEMIs and the Gaskins Foundation, which they usually are selecting people who are in the STEM careers. However, they chose the Urban League and the work of the Black Caregiver Network because of the way that it was empowering parents and students. So I wanted to have one of our parents speak. She was interviewed for the STEMmies, and let's see, I wanted you to hear her.
And getting to know them, build a community centered around the kids, around the schools, their academic performance, and again, just getting to know other parents. And then lastly, positioning ourselves as a parent group to do greater things in terms of advocacy over policies, influencing decision making at the school level, and anything that basically or ultimately improves the school and the performance of the students in the schools. So we met with parents in the form of PTAs or even in non-traditional ways of having parent groups, surveys as well, and even going into the schools to be kind of temporary fixtures in the schools to get to know the teachers and the students. I think action starts with awareness, so that's always baseline. Let's tell the people what we do, what our goals are, what our mission is. Get feedback from them. What are your goals? What's your mission? And then ultimately, how can we work together? And I think we are activated, although it may not seem like a large parent group. The fact that people know and you can easily call someone or text someone to say, here's what we're doing, we need your input, whether you're there or not, to go do, to accomplish some goal. I think that's been pretty key. So awareness and having a common voice and then doing work together. I think it's a continuation of, again, increasing awareness and advocacy. It can happen on so many different levels. If you just take the performance of schools overall and the imbalance in terms of performance for the schools and the reputation of the schools, if you just look at that, and that is the number one goal, you will see that it's a lifetime of work that still needs to be done. So we'll continue to advocate, to gather parents, to network in order to improve schools and schooling.
So we were really excited to see that let us know that we were being seen. That wasn't our key goal, was just like, let's win an award, but it was great to know that people were watching and people saw the ways that we were affecting education in Cincinnati, empowering caregivers and equipping them. This was the night of the STEMmies, and our organizer, Kelly Dukes, and some of our parents who went, and that is the award, and we were really excited about that. I think that the biggest thing that we learned was we have to change the master narrative, right? We have to change the master narrative that we are not involved as caregivers, that the outcomes that are happening with our students in schools are because of a lack of love or support or care from caregivers. I think that we also have to recognize that if we want people to show up, we have to have a space for them. We have to make them feel like they are valued. We have to ultimately see them, hear them, and value them in order to see what exactly they can do and how high they can fly. And that's really the biggest learning that I got overseeing this work. I am so proud of the work that we were able to do, and I'm so excited to see how we can move forward, but I'm also really clear that it is a long-term work. This is not just a turnaround and grant cycle work. This is a work that we're going to have to continue to do. So we are, currently looking for the best ways to continue that work. We know that, ending generational poverty is not going to happen without us working in the education system. And so that is something that we are committed to doing. But I'm really excited and grateful for the chance to share what we've done with parents, share the coalitions that we've built, and present this to you. And now I'll pause for questions. So our caregiver spanned, which was another reason that I really loved the caregiver network and love them, because Sarah is working on her PhD. Her students are on the honor roll. You know, she's on the LSDMC. She is one of those invested parents. And then we had parents who would come sometimes and not, and their parents had, or their students were dealing with some behavioral issues or other types of issues where they needed wraparound services, and but they were all able to come together and be on the same level and not feel like, oh, well, that mom is doing more than me, or, you know, whatever it was. So it really was the gamut. We didn't have any teachers per se, but we did have some parents who were like permanent fixtures in the parent center at their school, or, you know, who maybe had a background in education but are now doing something else. It ran the gamut. So we focused this cycle on elementary schools. So we had a couple parents, like the mother who was blind, her student was a high schooler, and she came to us because she had heard of what we had done. But mostly it was elementary schools. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yes.
First, thank you for the presentation.
Absolutely, thank you.
You did a great job with identifying and addressing issues. Obviously remarkable. The one thing I want to know is like process of going about establishing those coalitions.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very difficult, obviously, and I just want to know what's like specific framework that you have, you and your team came up with as far as establishing those connections. And once you did establish those connections, how did you just keep it going forward? Because it's very hard to lose those connections at that time.
Sure. And, you know, honestly, I will say that some of our partners, or the people that we were establishing coalitions with, were a little flaky. So I'm not going to say that that's not an issue, but I am a gadfly. So I will call you. Like I said, I used to work for the city. I, you know, have done political consulting before. So I am at all of the places where the people in Cincinnati, it's like 2 degrees of separation. So I would just walk up to people at, you know, something and be like, hey, you know, our caregiver network is doing this, that, or the other. Have you heard? And they're like, oh, okay. But you will hear from me because it's important. So I think that there has to be a fair amount of, you know, resilience and recognize and not taking things personal. So it's like, oh, well, this person that hasn't called me back, so they may not want to be on board. Sometimes in the world of, you know, COVID, you just forget. So I think making sure that you are doing that, but on the other side of that, also, who are the people who are connected to that person so that they'll continue to hear about it regardless of if they call you back or not, because people don't want to be the last ones to find out. So, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Hi, I was wondering, was there a lot of pushback from the school board and the CPS with getting parents this heavily involved? And if so, especially with this push to like redo how principals are being interviewed and selected, if so, like how did you guys manage that?
Mhm.
Because I know parents are a very heavily disregarded demographic in schools.
Mhm.
So I was just wondering.
So the gift that we were given was I would say 5 seats on our school board were elected in November of 2021. So of course, on the campaign trail, everybody wants as much parent engagement as they can. And so because of that, it was after they got elected, I heard that you want to be in parent engagement. This is what I heard on the trail. And we armed our parents with that information when they would talk to them, when they would go into schools, when they would talk to board members, you know, in the times when they did. I think the most resistance we had came from the district's parent engagement director, because her goal was to get parents into volunteering. And so as you can imagine, she targeted the white parents. I'm just going to be frank. She targeted white parents. She, you know, wanted them to volunteer in schools, and we were taking that model and blowing it up. So she's not very fond of us, but the school board members are. And that's the thing for us, is the school board members love us. So there's nothing that she can really do with us. And when people come to us and say, hey, you know, have you spoken with her? I'm like, you know, I think we have just 2 different models. She's focused on volunteerism. And while we know that that's an important part of parent engagement, our parent engagement looks a little different. So that I didn't want to, you know, throw shade on her. What she's doing is valuable, but ours is a little different. So thank you all. I think I'm past my time, but thank you so much and have a great day.
Jasmine, thank you so much for that. Can you show us some of your t-shirt and your swag?
Yes. So here's our t-shirt. It has I am ignored crossed out, and underneath it says I am seen, heard, and valued with the Black Caregiver Network and the Urban League equal sign. And then, of course, my favorite, because I'm a rebel, the fist. And then our parents asked for us to have our spectrum of engagement on magnets. So these are here as well, so that they could put it up there and see the spectrum of engagement and decide, what am I today? Am I the mom that's baking the cookies today? And then we have stickers and cups that when we go to activities, people can just get them and always remember us. So come by and get some.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. So I would like for us all to cleanse our palates. We're going to take a brief break to refresh before our next presentation. So I'll ask you all to return to the room at 11:22. Thank you. We have our next presenter who is queued up. We have our next presentation lined up. And it is my pleasure to introduce Todd Batiste. He is the Vice President of Education and Youth Development at the Urban League of Louisiana. So let's give him a warm welcome. Let's hear about the work that they have been doing in Louisiana around building public will for education equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Adenike. On behalf of our president, Judy Reese-Morris, she could not be here today. She's recovering from surgery. And our executive vice president, Kathy Washington, we are in the midst of doing a major hiring process in Louisiana. So you have me, Todd Batiste. I've only been with the league right now for about 5 months. So most of what you'll get is information. I have 5 months of lived experience in doing the work. So some of this I have been engaged with intentionally and understand where we're going and what we've been doing. But one of the things I usually do before I get up in front of a group to speak is what I try to use is the 3 B's. To be brilliant, to be brief, and to be gone. So folks, I don't want you up here talking all day. Get to your points, do what you gotta do. So I'll start that presentation by saying, Urban League of Louisiana's Equity Campaign. One of the things that I brought to the conversation as I prepared to come up here to speak with you all was to talk with our leadership about Louisiana and what Louisiana, how we operate as a state. Louisiana is a red state, so lots of our parishes are Republicans. So whenever you're talking about issues of equity and injustice, it's not always received well. But we understand what our role is at Urban League and what we need to do and why we do what we do. So we were excited to go on this journey by calling our education equity, our campaign, Education Equity for Louisiana. We are now a statewide organization. Initially, we were in New Orleans, but we branched out to the entire state. So when you're going into some of these other parishes, it is not always welcoming. So our approach to this work, we identified our approach to having every child deserving of a high-quality education. We were committed to creating a statewide equitable education system in which is the foundation to our pursuit for economic self-resilience, parity, and civil rights. We are driven by 4 pillars. We wanted to do this work. We thought it was important to have data. We understood data was a critical piece of this work. And one of the things we had to really recognize was that in Louisiana, most of the Black and brown students were disproportionately impacted by our system. And ironically, most of our kids were in public schools. So your private schools, it was interesting that, well, if all the Black kids and Hispanic kids and non-white students are in private schools, those students are excelling and doing well, but the few that are in our public school system, they seem to excel. We had to ask ourselves why. Why is that happening? So we took the approach and said we would look at a data-driven approach. We would engage community in this work, and we would we are partner-driven, and results-driven. We needed to make certain that we had results from the work that we were doing. I never clicked the slide. Huh? 'Cause I'm trying to do it on 2 different screens. Our vision for the work. Our vision was, with the support of Urban League, urban areas throughout Louisiana will embrace data-informed approaches to identify and address educational inequities, to close the gap in opportunities and achievement, and improve educational outcomes for all of our youth, particularly those that were economically disadvantaged. Those were children of color. Throughout Louisiana, we wanted to ignite parents throughout the state and empower them to build a sense of urgency around efficacy. We wanted to have a driven education reform and innovations for each of the parishes and communities that we work in, and we wanted to work to promote a deep and proactive conversation. We wanted families to be able to talk at the dinner table about these issues. We wanted students talking up and down the hallway about it. And we wanted folks in Baton Rouge to begin talking about what was happening in the education system throughout the state. The state will embrace a deeper commitment and interact with an overt way to look at the root causes of education inequities. Once again, I had to emphasize that Louisiana is a red state, and later on in this presentation, I'll give you some lived examples that I have from going into some of the parishes and talking about education equity and the pushback that we got the pushback and conversations we got around those kinds of conversations. Our strategy was simple. We wanted to go into communities and listen. It was difficult. When you live in New Orleans and you go across the state and you're having conversations with folks about issues of equity, New Orleans is New Orleans. I think everybody's familiar with New Orleans and its demographics. So when we talk about equity in New Orleans, it's received well because we understand the importance of it. When you go into other parishes, we didn't want to go into those communities and just start talking about equity. We had to figure out an approach to go into that community. So what we did was to identify staff in each of the parishes that we were going into so that they had the lived experience. They understood the culture. They understood why the work was important. When we went in, we wanted to provide them with data and research to support that there is a need for reform. So some folks, if we didn't have data telling them that from the state about what was happening in education, they were not open to listening. So we went in providing them with data. We wanted to create opportunities for meaningful student, parent, and stakeholder engagement. We needed to have other members outside of the education space working with us on these issues because it was important to them. If we didn't have business engaged in these conversations, it's harder for them to understand why we don't have capable and able employees. So business came to this table and started listening to what we were talking about. And then we wanted to provide tools to measure progress. We can go in presenting communities all the data that we want, but if we don't provide tools to measure progress, folks were saying, so what, you did that. So we developed a scorecard that I'll talk about later on in this presentation. Just to give you a feel for how we did this work, our educational equity work conducted a series of listening sessions. So when we went into Baton Rouge, when we went into Lafayette, we went into Shreveport, before we started talking about it, we went in and sat down and listened to understand the local culture, the community's unique challenges. What do you want to see happen for your community? What are your dreams for your children? Because in New Orleans, we may think one thing, but in Baton Rouge, it might be different. And then we wanted to identify the distinct biases and the systemic causes for the education inequity. We had to look deep at the data to tell us what was actually happening. Throughout the year, we hosted some virtual town hall meetings. Because we had gone into COVID, we shifted from in-person to virtual. And one of the things that we found with the virtual presentations, well, we had greater participation. Folks were willing and able to log in. But when we hosted some of our convenings, the participation was not as great. Oops, next slide. This was a big part of the work. When we talked about providing data, we went into the community, we talked with individuals, but when we went in, we had some data points already from the Louisiana Department of Education that indicated what some of the inequities were that existed in our school system around school readiness. We had data around third grade reading, eighth grade college matriculation, ACT, school culture. So we did have some data prior to going out into the community. But we went out and talked with them first to say, well, here's some preliminary data. Is there anything within this, anything in here that you think we need to include, if there is any additional data? Some communities talked about truancy, but that was one thing we had not gone into the community with. So we did go into those communities and look at what are some of those data points that we need to include. We produced several reports. The first one was in 2019, Advancing Educational Equity in Baton Rouge. That report, I had a link to it, but unfortunately, I'm not controlling it. But on our website, you can click on the link and you can see the full report. The full report is very comprehensive. It provides detail on the data and how communities can use this tool to advocate for changes that need to happen within the system. The key educational indicators, some that I've referenced already, wanted to look at access to high quality education, access to effective teachers, access to positive school climate. When we went into Baton Rouge, we found out in some of these parishes, there was no quality child care at all. There was parts of the parish that did not have child care. When we talked about highly effective teachers, one of the things that we found in some of the parishes that we were working in is that highly effective teachers went to high-performing schools. They chose not to work in those schools that were struggling. So in Baton Rouge, we're actually working with the school superintendent around identifying strategies and tools that we can use to incentivize high-performing teachers to remain in some of our challenging and low-performing schools. When we looked at the equity outcomes, third grade reading, we saw in several parishes where black and brown kids were scoring disproportionately lower than their counterparts. Third grade reading was a key indicator. Eighth grade math was another strong indicator. And during the upcoming legislative session, we have a representative from Mandeville that sponsored legislation that would retain a third grader if he or she is not reading on level. They're talking about a particular student, if that individual is not reading on level, he will be kept back. Those are challenges that we at Urban League think is prudent for us to address. So now during the legislative session, we're going up with some of those key stakeholders in those parishes that we're working with, advocating for this bill to be disbanded, thrown out the books. And because we have those other key stakeholders engaged in this from the business community, they understand the importance of not holding back black and brown students. On the following slides, it'll show the disparities. So I'll have an opportunity to share those disparities with you. Just looking at the data, it is quite clear that 28% of black students enter kindergarten ready to learn compared to 53% of its counterparts entering school ready to learn. 13% of Hispanic students are entering school ready to learn, while 80-some-odd% of its counterparts are entering school ready to learn. When we talk about percentage of individuals reading on grade level, scoring mastery on their English language art exam, the data tells us that 28%, and this is in 2021, 28% of black students scored mastery or advanced in that English language art compared to 68% for white students. 23% of Hispanic students versus 68% of white students. Those kinds of data points are what we've used to go into communities and talk about why it is important for us to close the gap. We've engaged students, parents, and other stakeholders in these conversations. As we work with communities in Louisiana for education equity, we continuously engage students and those parents because this is what matters to us. We provide communities with the ability to influence decision makers and attain sustainable outcomes. When we talk about the empowering individuals or disenfranchised folks, we have utilized ULEAD and our Parent Pride program to engage them in this work and build the kinds of champions that we think are important to go up and advocate for this. Excuse me. And I think when we look at that, it's highlighted in red, Urban League Youth Force Family Engagement Toolkit. This was a toolkit that we developed in partnership with Youth Force. It's a group of individuals that work with kids that are dealing with workforce issues. So we thought it was important to engage them in conversations around how do we better support parents, and the toolkit is used to engage families in conversations around the importance of the data points that we reference throughout the work. I'm going to skip that one because this one is, I think that was a duplicate. Now this is where I started working with the league around the work of policy and advocacy across the state. We had done a series of conversations in Baton Rouge and thought it was important to engage key stakeholders. So we had staff that's housed in Baton Rouge that began to reach out to key constituents throughout the parish and said, we want to talk with you about education equity. They bought into the concept, and we were able to get the school superintendent to say, yes, this is important. So our president and CEO went to meet with the school superintendent, just had a preliminary conversation about the equity work that we had done in New Orleans. We shared with them the report. The superintendent was actually interested in education equity and said he wanted to partner with the Urban League. Subsequently, he identified additional key partners for us to come together and have conversations about some of the data points that we referenced earlier. Those data points were then presented to other stakeholders, the business community. We have faith-based organizations coming to those conversations, and we are now developing a scorecard. So as we work with the school district on the importance of all of those indicators, we now have a scorecard that the district has adopted to show whether or not they are making progress or the lack of progress that's happening with third grade reading, kids scoring proficient on their 8th grade math exam, ACT scores. And that scorecard is what the community then said, we will evaluate the district on that progress. As we give students a report cards, now the district has a scorecard that those key stakeholders are talking about and asking, how are we doing with these things? We also had to identify what are some best practices that exist out there to close those gaps. There was an initiative called the Campaign for Grade Level Reading that looked at what do we need to do to effectively see to it that those students that may not score on that ACT exam, the third grade reading exam may not score well on that exam, so that legislation that's happening in Baton Rouge is disbanded. We need to address those issues. This slide here just shows you a data walk that we went through with those key stakeholders to help them understand the importance of data and how it contributes to our work. Our U-League group was another group of individuals that we thought could help us to advocate for changes that we thought were important in the system. Our U-Lead Academy, once a student completes the academy, we are now working on securing funding to support the projects that come out of U-League if it aligns with our data and advocacy work. The work that we're doing up in Baton Rouge. If it aligns with our education equity work and it supports that work, we're now offering them a $25,000, $50,000, and $75,000 grant to launch their program so that they can continue to build on and support education equity throughout the state. This is quite unique. We learned this from the Kellogg Foundation. If you're a Kellogg Fellow, when you go through that program, their grant rewards are a lot greater, but this is just an additional seed to help them grow their work, grow their program, and continue to support our advocacy and educational equity work across the state. I shared with you the scorecard that we're using. Our equity scorecard examines educational disparities related to opportunities and outcomes through key indicators disaggregated by race and other demographics, exploring historical and cultural context and asking why identified disparities exist. This toolkit is developed in concert with each district. So the district helps us to develop the toolkit. One of the things I referenced early on in the presentation was the pushback that we got from one of our parishes. We went into Lafayette, Louisiana. We went in, we met with the superintendent of the Lafayette School District. We sat down and explained to her our work, why we were doing this work and why it was important. Her initial conversation with us was, we're open and willing to work with you all on this issue. Later on, after months of waiting for a response, she responded to us that she was not interested in working on educational equity because they were already doing it. We shared with her, we understand and we're coming here to build on and support the work that you're doing. So subsequently, she said she was unwilling to work with us. That did not matter to us. We went out, we found other stakeholders, other partners, and we had some elected officials that were in Lafayette that understood that that work was important, and they agreed to say, we have now convened individuals in Lafayette, a small group, just to start having the conversation. They are actually meeting for the second time today in Lafayette, and we are now getting some traction. She then submitted a letter to some of the partners in Lafayette telling them that she was not pleased with the league coming in and implying that she was not working on equity. The leadership at our Urban League sent a letter back to her telling her at no time and at any place that we say you were not doing work around educational equity. We wanted to partner with you on this work, and we will share with you the results of our findings as we go through this process of identifying what inequities exist in Lafayette. So that was just last week. One of the things we thought was important was, I'm gonna say, I thought it was important. I'd only been with the league for a couple of months, and to get a response like that from a superintendent from an outside parish, it was like, Judy, you have to hurry up and respond. You know, she sent this letter. And the response from our leadership was like, well, she waited almost 3-4 months to respond to us, to tell us that she was not unwilling to work with us. We pumped our brakes, and I understood what the league's approach was to this kind of work, and appreciated the fact that Judy said, Todd, hold off. Just go on, you have other work you have to do, I have this. And the response went out just yesterday. So we anticipate hearing from Lafayette, Louisiana. Well, I'm curious to see what the response will be from those folks in Lafayette, but we're continuing to do the work. And we're building coalitions in those parishes to allow us to go up to Baton Rouge and advocate for equity within our districts. This is just an example of some of the media posts I wanted to and had intended on including a few opt-ads that we have put out in those parishes to talk about the importance of education equity. Moving too fast, I forgot to include it on the slide. But we did produce a couple of op-eds that we put out in those communities, and we did get some traction because folks read the op-ed and they gave us some feedback on it. These were a couple examples of some of the social media posts that we posted, and we're looking at what type of traction we're getting on social media. We have this on billboards just to create an awareness around some of those indicators that we're looking at throughout the work of our educational equity campaign. When we talk about coalition building, the list of partners that we had engaged in this work is very comprehensive, and it was not in my best interest to list all of them. But the Urban League of Louisiana has great partnerships across the state. This is just an example of a few that we have in some of the parishes. One of the pieces that we thought was critically important was not just to engage education leaders. We thought it was important to engage the business community in this work, in those conversations, so that we understand, so that they understand when we go up to Baton Rouge and advocate for changes, or when we go up to fill out a card indicating we're not in favor of a particular bill that's being sponsored, it is just not the Urban League going up. We have other business partners that go up there to speak to that for us as well. I thought it was important to talk about the challenges. COVID impacted the work in ways that we're still trying to quite figure out. Those town hall meetings that we were hosting where folks were coming out in person and actually providing voice gave us a lot more detail on what the salient issues were when they came out, that we did not get the same kind of response when folks were on Zoom. I don't know why folks were somewhat uncomfortable or unwilling to share those that direct feedback, but when we had folks in the room in person, Kathy and Judy shared that it was very different in terms of the types of conversations we were having. The other thing I briefly shared with you is about the Lafayette Public School District. They just were not in favor of it. We anticipated that because we have a staff person that is on staff and is from Lafayette and said, this community is not ready for it. But we understand the importance of it. So we see that as a challenge. We know it's important, but we will, Louisiana being a red state, we know when we go into some parishes, we're gonna get some pushback. It's not gonna be, come on in, let's talk about this, let's put some things in place, let's get some things happening. The results. I need my glasses to see that. In New Orleans, we have great work. I mean, we've done amazing work in New Orleans. We have a superintendent that in a 100-day plan incorporated educational equity in that work. New Orleans is just very on board and open to the importance of education equity because most of, if not all of our students in public schools are African American. In New Orleans, white students primarily go to private schools. So we know why we have to make certain that what happens in New Orleans is important. And we've been in New Orleans for a very long time. In Baton Rouge, we published our second Advancing Education Equity Report, and we're creating, in concert with the school superintendent, a scorecard for them to evaluate the district on the progress or lack of progress that they're making. And we have an advisory board that informs this work as well, and they work with us. We're moving steadfast in Lafayette. We know that we're going to have some challenges, and there's the second convening on the 28th, and we're expecting to publish our Advancing Education Equity Report in December of 2022. I'm excited to say that we're continuing to build momentum. We secured a $250,000 grant from the Kresge Foundation to solicit input from parents to design solutions to address the salient issues directly impacting the quality of life for families as it relates to equity. And we have a $5,000 grant from the Kellogg Foundation that's pending. In New Orleans, one of the things that we were able to push for as it relates to early education was we have a millage now that will invest $20 million in early education to see to it that Black and brown children have access. It is challenging in New Orleans to qualify for child care assistance. This program here would be free, and we anticipate serving about 2,000 kids in our early child care system. So that's exciting for us as well. And my last point is the collaboration with East Baton Rouge. East Baton Rouge has challenges across the parish where there are some parts of that community that does not have child care or any child care. And the child care that is available is on the other side of town, and Black and brown families cannot afford to get there. So we're trying to work with them to identify communities that we can actually build child care centers in so that they don't have that challenge. I have no other slides. That was the last of the presentation. I know I in no way embodied all of the work of the league and the work that they have been doing for years. As I said, I've only been there for a short period. I'm excited to learn from the cohort that's here, bring some of those experiences back to New Orleans so that we can continue to do the work that we know is important for the betterment of this community as it relates to education. Thank you. I'll hopefully answer any questions that you all might have. Mm-hmm.
So what you had done, there were no parents involved in that, or were there parents involved in
The Pride parents participated in some of those stakeholder engagements conversations, and the director engaged them directly in those reports. Like, she would share the education equity reports with our Pride parents. But I think if you're a constituent, you may or may not have kids, but some of those individuals represented an organization and was the voice for as a parent. Mm-hmm.
So the data that you had where it talked about Black and Latino children or Hispanic being less than their peers when they started, where'd you get that data?
That's from the Louisiana Department of Education.
Okay.
It's available on the website.
So that was already,
Yeah, that was already provided. We used that to show the inequities that existed and how we need to close the gaps for those individuals, for Black and brown students. So that information was available.
and last question, what color are the superintendents from Baton Rouge, Lafayette?
Lafayette is a white female, Baton Rouge is a Black male. In New Orleans, we have a Black female now. But prior to Superintendent Williams, we had a Black man. Yeah, it does make a difference. Yes.
Yes, can you talk a little bit about the equity data walk? It looked like from the picture that was an event.
It was a meeting where the information, those data points that we had on those slides about what exists, the gaps that exist, we wanted to share that with the room that was in Baton Rouge so that they could see. And if there were any data points that we did not reference, that as a community they thought was prudent that we include, gave them the opportunity to include that. And because we had educators in the room, there were other data points that came up. I think English as a second language was one data point that came up. I think truancy was an issue that came up in Lafayette. We didn't reference that in our work, but we did. As we go through the work, we're now looking at those data points and coming up with best practices for us, for the district to close the gap. Those other partners allow us to bring them to the table. And I can say in Baton Rouge, Acadian, United Way of Acadiana, they are looking at grade level reading because the United Way of Southeast Louisiana has launched a campaign for grade level reading. So there's an investment that they potentially will make in helping the district address third grade, the challenges with third grade reading.
And then the framework documents and the equity report, are those available on your website?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to click on it, but I'm not that savvy. Another question?
Two questions for me. One, thank you for your presentation, but how often do you anticipate actually releasing this school card? Is that going to be every year, every 4 years?
Well, with Baton Rouge, we anticipate this will be the first time that they're using it. We'll have to sort of see how it works, but we're using it for parents to begin to say, stakeholders begin to hold the district accountable. So I can't really say when we might change it, but as life, there might be another iteration of it. But I think it's exciting to see that the district has adopted the school card. That was our ultimate goal. What we try to say is we're going to leave from behind. We knew where we wanted to go. We just had to get them to go along with us. Mm-hmm. Second question, I'm gonna come
My
to.
last question for you is, on your scorecard, did you monitor, did you actually look at the knowledge gap of parents with the benchmark results that their students were getting? Is that something that you...
No, we have not looked at the link between parents and those indicators. It was strictly educational indicators from the Department of Education and within the school district. We have not looked at. Now, one thing that we're starting to look at is school climate. What is the school climate like for students? So that's a data point that we're looking at now. Last question.
The table,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the table you presented, it had, I believe, economically advantaged,
Mhm.
economically disadvantaged. Then it also showed Latino and Black. And the urban
Right.
league, we serve Black folks. So
Mhm.
the question I had is, how did you delineate the economic disadvantage, and also how did that help you strategically by presenting data that way when you were trying to make the...
Well, I think when we looked at the free and reduced lunch, students in the school district that get free and reduced lunch, there's some income data that we did get from the school to show individuals' income. So I think we can show that kids that come from less wealthy families are less likely to demonstrate success. So that's the goal, so that those individuals that are economically disadvantaged, we want to close the gap for those students so that they are on par with their white counterparts. I think I'm out of time. Thank you all.
Todd, thank you so much for your presentation. I would say for 5 months on the job, I think you represented the Urban League of Louisiana very well. All right, and our last presentation, our last presenting affiliate is the Urban League of Greater Cleveland. And we're actually going to have a Zoom presentation from them, and they are pulling it up right now. So this is going to be presented by Marcia Maccabee. She is the president and CEO of the Urban League of Greater Cleveland.
Good afternoon, everyone. The Urban League of Greater Cleveland is in the house virtually and happy to be here with you in this EAT presentation. And we hope to provide for you today a unique perspective on the EAP work. So we've entitled our presentation EAP Forward, of course, aligned with the idea of leaping forward. And today in our presentation includes Gabrielle Folks, our Assistant Director of our Equity Institute and Special Projects, Mayor Frank Whitfield, the Mayor of Elyria, Ohio, who is also once an urban leaguer, always an urban leaguer, previous CEO of the Lorain County Urban League, and has been working with me and the Urban League of Greater Cleveland in this work for many, several years. And I serve, of course, as the president and CEO of the Urban League of Greater Cleveland, bringing a little bit of a unique perspective of 17 years of corporate experience and 18 years as the Education and Youth Development Director prior to becoming the CEO. So those are some of the sort of perspectives you'll hear coming through our presentation today.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Makabi. Hello to everyone. We can't see you all, but we're sure you're looking wonderful and beautiful. Sorry that we couldn't be there with you today. So I'm going to begin by just providing a little bit of history about the Urban League of Greater Cleveland. So we were founded in 1917 with the intentional focus on the well-being of the African-American community in Greater Cleveland. So we really like this quote from the National Urban League about the EAP work because we have always seen this as more of the mission of the EAP work, and we've really adopted this as our philosophy. So ensuring that we are deepening opportunities for families, filling in the gaps for resources for students and educators, accelerating progress, and then of course, delivering more fully on the promise of education.
Okay. So as you heard in the history, the Urban League of Greater Cleveland has really been a part of the EAP programming, the EAP work for over 10 years, since 2010 at the beginning. And clearly because of that, we have had several phases or several stages of engagement. And so we want to just kind of give you a little bit of a background on that, so you can really understand how with the Hewlett grant and the Building Public Will piece, we really saw that as taking us to sort of a 2.0 position in our education work. And so I'll just highlight quickly, phase one in the very beginning was focused on looking at the funding that came from the National Urban League and aligning it in a matrix kind of way with other funding we had in our Education and Youth Department, and leveraging that funding, and then looking at how we would advocate for educational issues that were going on in our ecosystem here in education. And so we, and by the way, our Urban League serves all of Cuyahoga County. So that's our catchment area. And then we've had several iterations of our stakeholder groups. Over time, we had one stakeholder group that was sort of focused on the No Child Left Behind. We had another one that was on Common Core state standards. We had another group that was focused on Every Student Succeeds Act. And now this latest iteration, which Gabrielle will talk about a little bit later, was really focused more on what was going on during the pandemic, post-pandemic transitions that needed to happen, needs of students and families, and that kind of approach, but always keeping our finger on the pulse of what the needs of our community are so that we could be poised to come with solution and response. So fast forward, we move on. And then we began to be invited to the Wallace Foundation Education Leadership Learning Consortium, or we refer to as the ELLC. And Ohio was chosen as one of the states to participate along with other states. We met a number of you who may be in the room in the Wallace work. And we were very, very pleased to be a part of that. And we think we had a rock star collaboration because we had our superintendent of instruction from the state of Ohio, along with some of his staff. We actually had then the superintendent of Cleveland, Frank Whitfield, who you'll hear from in our discussion in a little bit, was also a part of it as when he was the CEO of the Lorain County Urban League. And then we had our own late Reverend Stanley Miller, who was very near and dear to us and served as one of our community leads in our work. And so we had a great time. We built great relationships, and I can tell you that our state superintendent was at every meeting that we had. And not only was he there, but fully engaged. And we all were very sad to see him leave his position at the Ohio Department of Education, and are waiting to see who hopefully build a similar relationship with the new person taking the seat. So again, as we moved forward, and we looked at actualizing community priorities through the planning and development of our community-led stakeholder campaigns, we zeroed in on 3 key areas that we were going to focus on. And for the Urban League of Greater Cleveland, they were the 3rd grade reading guarantee, high school graduation, and college and career standards, which all of you in this room pretty much know. That aligns to our Project Ready programs. And we were one of the original 3 Project Ready sites that started at the Urban League of Greater Cleveland. And then, of course, connecting to out of school time learning and summer extended day. Moving on with the Wallace work, we were asked to, Wallace gave a second layer of funding to every state the opportunity to come up with something creative that you would do as a second phase to your work. And I can tell you that everybody in our collaborative nudged and encouraged that the Urban League would develop a tool for the community that would live on the Urban League's website and sort of reside with the Urban League as a result of the community engagement work we had done. And so we developed, along with the Ohio State Center at the Ohio State University, the Center for Family and Community Engagement. And that resource now sits on our website, and Gabrielle is going to show you a little taste of that towards the end of our presentation. So finally, in phase 3, we all know, fast forward, the whole social justice issues that occurred around the same time as the pandemic, and all of the pour in of resources that came for Black-led, Black-serving, Black and Brown-serving organizations. We were also such a recipient, and we received funding from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which we also leveraged. And we saw the opportunity to not just do activities, but really move from what I call from success to significance, to really becoming that leader and that thought leader and that convener and that facilitator, the go-to place in the ecosystem for work with the education community. And that's what we set our sights on doing in phase 3. I'll share with you that one of the challenges that happened in phase 3 is our coordinator of our EAP work became ill and ended up having surgery. So we had some gap time that we lost. And so what we did while we were waiting on her to heal and come back, and then of course, with the pandemic going on, we were not meeting in person. So we had that disconnect. And so what we did, though, is we just built a lot on what already had occurred, and we expanded our positioning in the community. And we'll talk about some of what that really meant and what the outcomes are that occurred because we took that approach. Okay, and I think in the interest of time, we'll go on to the next slide, please, Gabrielle. So this is where Mayor Frank is going to come in and join me in this communication, because I want to sort of now, Mayor Frank can only be with us to close to the very end of our time and may not be able to stay with us for the Q&A, but he's been very helpful with us in doing some of the activities that we've done with this Hewlett grant, one of which is this fireside chat we'll mention, and also our final convening that happened on September 30th. But I want him to talk with me and with you, to share with you about how we sort of emerged into these roles of thought leader and facilitator and convener, and how he was a part of that, and how he saw the Urban League move through those chairs as we worked together over the years. So Mayor Frank,
Yes.
let me bring you into the conversation.
Thank you, President Maccabee, and thank you for the opportunity to share what my experience has been. And Adenike and the team, thank y'all for taking some time to listen to this. You know, as President Maccabee mentioned, prior to serving in this capacity as mayor, I served as the president and CEO of the neighboring Urban League and the Lorain County Urban League in Ohio as well, and worked alongside President Maccabee as we were a part of the Wallace Foundation project, the ELLC, as she mentioned, where we sat at the table with state superintendents, school board members, school officials, and really started to help our state think about how they thought about issues like equity and excellence, and helped our state. You know, you'll see the Urban League's thumbprint in our state's school education plan. So this thought leadership work, I guess I bring it up to kind of underscore that this thought leadership work didn't start recently, that this work has been ongoing, and this is a continuation, and I think a great moment for the Urban League to really stand up the work that it's been doing over time. And so in 2019, we brought that stakeholder group together again. And in particular, our target was organizing all the Ohio Urban Leagues. So President Maccabee convened us all in Cleveland, and we had some NUL representatives from the National Urban League come and do some more education, unpacking, thought leadership work. We talked about the power of equity audits in school systems. Actually had some superintendents talk about it at that convening. And then that brings us to where we are now, which still Urban League on the forefront of having the conversation around, I would say, beyond education reform, but transformation that we need during this time. And we're working on an event November 7th where the National Teacher of the Year, who happens to be from Northeast Ohio, is going to be talking with us about the impact of politics and policies on the classroom. And again, hoping to, he's an African-American teacher, so he's going to talk about his journey being an African-American teacher, which I believe represents less than 10% of the, and I'm being generous with 10, I want to say it's like 1% of the teaching faculty in the country. And so we'll unpack that, but also talk about student outcomes. And again, it's another way that the Urban League is making sure that folks don't forget that this work has been going on since 1910. And for the Cleveland Urban League, it's been going on for a long time, and for the Urban League movement in general. So just trying to underscore that and make sure people know you got a lot of institutional knowledge right here and experience to move the needle. And I'll be here for a minute so I can answer any questions as well once the presentation concludes.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Frank. And I will tell you that when the Urban League of Greater Cleveland launched its strategic plan in 2016, we crafted a bold statement that said that we desired to become the preeminent empowerment organization for African Americans and all of the issues confronting them. And we defined that, and we said we knew that we would reach that when we became known and sought after as a thought leader, convener, and facilitator. And what I can tell you is that today, when I took over the Urban League of Greater Cleveland as the CEO, I couldn't get a return phone call from funders or major players in the city. What I can tell you now is everybody is calling the Urban League and asking us to be at serious tables, often tables that we were never at before, serious decision-making tables. And one of the things that we know is that if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. And so we decided that in this Urban League, we were tired of being on the menu and we were going to change that game. So individuals from the state of Ohio are coming to us, asking us to oversee the STEM career work here in this area. We received a summer bridge grant because all of the hours of learning loss that occurred for our students during the pandemic. We, the Urban League of Greater Cleveland, actually are the co-chair of our Racism as a Public Health Crisis collaborative work here. And there are 5 pillars in that work, one of which is education. So I think, and I don't want to forget, under the thought leader area, there is a new movement called the Greater Cleveland Career Collaborative, which is a curriculum and a concerted effort to make sure that the opportunities for career pathways are extended to every student in every school. And the Urban League has been asked to develop curriculum for that, as well as lead the extensions of that work from the Cleveland district to inner ring suburbs, and we're funded for that work. So going to the next slide. What I want to say is what I just described to you has leveraged new funding for the Urban League of Greater Cleveland to the tune of $1.5 million over a 2-year period. And we got there because on the programs with EAP, our education programs that we have on Career Pathways, Project Ready, My Brother's Keeper, we delivered on our outcomes and outperformed our competitors. And the key thing that I want to leave there is it's about relationships, relationships, relationships. Okay, so I'm turning it over, Gabrielle. Now to you, in the interest of time, I want to just keep us moving. A lot of our stakeholders have been superintendents, state chiefs, state legislators, parents and families and students, community-based organizations, and you can see all of the rest. And so if you would go on now, Gabby, to talk in a little more detail about our stakeholder participation, because a lot of that really accrues to this particular Hewlett grant that we're talking about today.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Mayor Frank and Ms. Makavi. So as we just kind of discussed, our stakeholder, our EAP work, has seen a number of stakeholder circles and groups. And so our most latest and recent iteration of our EAP stakeholder circle was formalized in 2019. And so this group of highly committed professionals and individuals came together to focus on those 3 EAP priority areas of the 7 that was rolled out by the National Urban League to focus on issues of inequity within education. So who are our members of our stakeholder circle? They are people just like you and I. They are parents, grandparents, aunts, educators, teachers. As we kind of discussed, we've had people from the Ohio State Board of Education, from the Ohio Department of Education. And so they meet monthly to share their efforts designed to raise the quality of education for children of color and low-income children. So they come together, they share different events that are perhaps going on within their schools or within their districts and communities, share resources. And of course, throughout the pandemic, those meetings were essential because this group of individuals came together to share and talk about their experiences and best practices. So what was our specific ask of the stakeholder circle? So one, of course, to continue to develop relationships. These are people who are really entrenched in our community and have such an array of expertise and know so many people. A lot of our stakeholders have been involved in work at the national level to some capacity. And then, of course, study the current issues and trends in education policies and programming to help inform the work that we're doing, to identify those areas of need according to those three priority areas, and then to set priority areas, to set priorities based on community input, of course, and the current issues and trends. And then a lot of their work before their most recent campaign, our campaign was equity and excellence in education. And most recently, the campaign that the Stakeholder Circle developed was raising the bar, high standards, equitable opportunities, and successful outcomes. And so once the development of the campaign was complete, then our Stakeholder Circle and stakeholder members went to work to plan their campaign activities and, of course, organized according to those three priority areas. Okay, so I love this picture so much because I think this was one of the first events that I was a part of, that the Stakeholder Circle was a part of, and that they helped put together. And so Mayor Frank mentioned this EAP convening that we held at our local community college at Tri-C. And so represented here was Lorain County, Stark, Warren, Youngstown, Akron Urban Leagues. And so we asked them to bring their stakeholders. And so we had students represented here, and then of course our stakeholders as well. And this is not everyone that was in attendance that day. We took this picture at the end, but it brings back so many memories. And so during this convening, it was really about sharing the EAP work and the campaign and the work being done around ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. And then also, if you guys remember the NCOS campaign, the No Ceilings on Success, which was the National Urban League's national campaign, which sought to hold states accountable for their ESSA plans. And so this was really, building on the EAP work that we were continuing to do and that had already been done. And then, of course, we were blessed to have the National Urban League's presence. Robin Ince, who is the former VP of Education Policy, Advocacy, and Engagement. So it was a really great event. Okay, so I will quickly, I just want to uplift some of the outcomes of our Stakeholder Circle. So one, which I think is the most important, as you've probably heard, which is partnerships. And through those partnerships, we've been able to expand our education work into more districts. And now superintendents and people are coming to us asking if we can, come into their schools and in their areas with the programs that we're doing. So community outreach. One of the things that we discovered this summer was, as our Stakeholder Circle was in the community talking about the EAP work and the activities that they were doing, people were interested, in the other services that the Urban League of Greater Cleveland offers. And I think that the pandemic definitely pushed this, but people were particularly interested in, the programming and services that our entrepreneurship offers, our services around workforce development. And so that really showed us that, we have to be intentional about layering on our efforts because people have a wide array of needs. And so we also developed a framework for a playbook. And so the playbook really outlines the journey and the path that our Stakeholder Circle took in developing a campaign and how they organized and some of the activities that they were engaged in. And then one of the most exciting outcomes is, of course, the Family School Engagement Guide, which I will show here in a second. And just wanted to show you all, so this is one of the tools that we use in our outreach efforts. And so this is our EAP Hot Card. We have a couple of QR codes on here so that people can access the op-eds that we produced earlier this summer. And then the other QR code is to be able to access the family engagement guide. And just some brief information about the 3 areas that the stakeholder circle focuses on. Okay, so quickly, I am going to pull up our family engagement guide so that you all can see that. So here on our site, I won't go through it, but under programs, if you have time or if you're interested, please check it out. It's a resource for families to be able to strengthen and move forward their communications, with the schools of their children. There's so many excellent questions in here. Some people don't know how to have conversations, with the educators of their children, and so this guide definitely helps with that as well. Okay.
We probably could have spent the whole time walking you through this, but time just wouldn't permit.
Yes. Okay. So I think that is all for us, unless Ms. Mockabee or Mayor Frank, if you had anything additional to add.
Mayor Frank, I defer to you. Did you have any closing comments?
No, I'm just really here for any questions. I think we unpacked a lot there. As you mentioned, we could do a whole day conference on the work that's been done, but there might be some specifics that folks want to know about.
Absolutely. So we're here to serve you with the Q&A at this point.
Yes.
How the Urban League of Greater Cleveland was evolved into a player in the region.
You said how did the Urban League of Greater Cleveland evolve as
a player in the region?
A key player.
Okay, I'll take that one, and then Mayor Frank, if you want to jump in. The thing that I think is unique for Cleveland is, so first of all, the Urban League of Greater Cleveland is the oldest affiliate in the state of Ohio among 7 of us. We have had a history of working together as an Ohio Council of Urban Leagues. And so one of the things that I've worked hard to try to do is keep us connected and moving forward with an agenda for the entire state. So I think one of the ways we've done that is when I receive funding to do, Gabrielle, can you take off the screen share, okay. So that whenever I got funding to do the education work, I thought about my colleagues who are in smaller affiliates that maybe didn't have the resources to move forward or weren't as much engaged in the education work, and always tried to create a piece to bring them along as well. And so by doing that, we received an education the ability to then have a bigger presence across not only Northeast Ohio with a real particular presence, but across the state. And one of the things that really grew us in 2014, and I think it was 2014, when the National Urban League Conference was in Cincinnati, my friend Donna Jones Baker asked me to develop for her a pre-conference education summit, which we did, and it was held at the Underground Freedom Railroad Center. And we put together the whole program, got all the speakers, the entertainment, everything. We had over 300 people to attend that. It was amazing. And that really gave all of the OC, and we invited all of our OCUL, everybody in the Ohio Council had a role. We paid for them to get there, for them to participate. And really, I'm a very collaborative leader, and I know many of my colleagues are. So we just like to promote that collaboration and model it so that as we bring other entities in to work with us, they already understand how we collaborate and then therefore can join in the collaboration.
And President Mockabee, just to build off of that, I think the true answer is because of President Mockabee and the her approach, and she wouldn't say this about herself, but she mentioned it in the presentation, relationships, relationships, relationships. She formed relationships with the business community, with the political community, with the civic community in the region, where if she invites you, you show up. And I think that's important, that you got leaders who are respected and have managed relationships well. 'Cause I think that's been the key to not only getting the Urban League affiliates at the table, but I think to one of the points of the question about being a key player in the region, it's been because of Marsha's relationships that she's built.
All right. So, having heard the presentations from the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio, the Urban League of Louisiana, and the Urban League of Greater Cleveland, I just wanted to provide a forum, an open forum for folks who are here and similarly engaged in coalition work to speak briefly about some of the work that you're doing. Part of what we want to do here, part of our goal is to really build connections. And as we look forward to expanding our funded portfolio for the Equity and Excellence Project, it's important for us to know what's happening. And so I'd like to invite anyone from affiliates who have not presented to sort of talk about any kind of local coalition work that you may be involved in. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Hopkins. I'm the president and CEO of the Urban League of Greater Hartford and Connecticut. And our work is not too far removed from what you just heard shared in Cleveland, in that we are an affiliate that was recovering or rebuilding from some challenging times over the years and reestablishing our credibility and work within the city of Hartford. But fortunately, we were in a position to get a running start in some particular areas, one being in education, and that was because of the commitment from Adenike, someone, you heard the folks in Cleveland mention Robin, thank you, yep, and Hal, who knew the success of our Project Ready programming and the opportunity that we would have working with some key players, particularly in the education equity space, because of some of the work that Senator Chris Murphy was doing in Connecticut. And what we've been able to do most recently, though, with our coalition building has been to leverage some of the work that we've been doing with the city and summer youth work, and realizing that while we might be doing well to get our students, particularly our Project Ready scholars, through high school and on to college, we've also recognized some of the challenges that they've had in college. And so, there's this continuum now that we're working on and really looking to provide the success resources to our students who are continuing their education. And so, the readiness, I think, is the element of what we're focusing on, particularly in our coalition work. And so we're partnering with various stakeholders and folks in that space to ensure that our students not only complete high school, not only are positioned to go on to college, but be able to have success in college. And so it's almost like taking a few steps back and reverse engineering and looking backwards and trying to figure out and understand some of the things we have to make sure are in place to make sure those students succeed. So, and I think, again, to piggyback on some of what President Mockabee said, the importance of this work is really trying to set in place measures for our students to be able to succeed, and that in large part requires us to identify folks who understand the challenges that are going into the success factors for our students, and they range, and so the partnerships that come into play are very important. But we build on our Project Ready Scholars programs, and we again work with our school district, their corporate partners, and there are other agencies, and of course there are higher learning institutions that we work very closely with as well. So we're excited again to continue our work. We look forward to how we will really start to hone in on some of those key areas at the high school level specifically. But we're excited about what we're doing with our students, getting them ready for college.
Good afternoon to all of you. One thing about the Urban League is we are definitely a movement. And from the presentations that we've seen, that I believe what the Urban League of the Upstate brings to this is the fact that we are doing exactly what others are doing, just in a different context. Project Ready is a major component for our affiliate, specifically within our education department. And just as we just witnessed from the president of Greater Cleveland, I believe, when she talked about bringing along the other affiliates, that has been our actual goal in our Equity and Excellence project. We are working with the Columbia Urban League as well as the Urban League of Trident or Charleston, making sure that we work together for the state and the sake of our state. Project Ready is beautiful, it's wonderful, but we realize that it's the parent piece that is the actual missing link. That's the area that there's so much gap for our students. So we're working on building out a toolkit so our parents know how to advocate. They know how to actually build community within schools for our students using resources from the University of South Carolina, as well as other HBCU schools to actually bring together thought leaders around this toolkit that we're building so that we can have diversity and we can have a clear, concise message for our parents when they go back to advocate for their students and also how to support their students. Again, Project Ready 2.0 and soon to be 3.0 is a wonderful curriculum. It's a great signature program of this great body that we all are a part of. But what we need is we gotta have some connection between that parent, that school, the school system, and then the student. So by focusing on the parent, it allows us to actually come back and to have that undercurrent that brings all of those various sectors together so that the student can have equity in an SEL environment. Because South Carolina, every time we have these equity conversations, seem to show up as being mediocre, being okay. The data is okay. But we found that if we go just a little bit deeper into the data, that we found that the parents didn't understand the data. The data said that African Americans were good in certain parts of the state. They were all right, getting a decent education, but then we found out that when you went to actually break down what those numbers meant for each county, each town, that it really wasn't so well. So by actually allowing our parents to know what does the data mean, what are the resources out there, it allows us to, again, close the gap on such a great program as Project Ready, and then allow equity to be then in the classroom and in the system to which we have to eventually tear down and rebuild. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Shonda Collins. I serve as the Associate Vice President of Development at the Columbus Urban League. I'll be brief because we are very much in the beginning stages or preliminary stages of our work around education equity. But I wanted to share because we're taking somewhat of a different approach in terms of what we are saying is driving that work. So we started at the onset of the pandemic a Equity Now coalition, and they originally were focused on COVID relief and the disparities that were illuminated through the pandemic, at the onset of the pandemic. So it has since evolved into other critical need areas for our community. And one of those things around our youth is youth suicide. So we have actually approached it from that perspective. So what's driving suicide for our youth in this particular time? So there are members of the coalition that represent other community agencies, other Black-led agencies. There are several representatives and elected officials that are a part of that work and engaged in that as well. But I just wanted to share that as a way that we're approaching it kind of in a different capacity, so specifically around that issue. But it is helping to, that is helping to drive what our outcomes and our strategy is around that work. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna try to be brief because I can be long-winded. So Paris is my timekeeper. But I'm Achilles from the Lorain County Urban League, and we've been doing this work for a minute. I have a very unique perspective because before staff, I was a community organizer. So I was a partner with the Lorain County Urban League, and in our EEP work, we hosted monthly stakeholder sessions around things that were impacting our kids just getting to schools, and then our students being able to function in school. So we had a lot of conversation around mental health and transportation. So in our county, public transportation is almost non-existent, and so it's a huge barrier for our students, especially living in northeastern Ohio. We get a lot of snow. And also just thinking about the mental health pieces that have really affected and impacted our students way before the pandemic hit us. So as I got on and was able to be staff, we had a designated group of stakeholders where we were really talking about what are those gaps, and then also what's keeping our parents from being fully engaged, because we know that they want to be engaged. And so I don't know how this happened, but the conversation shifted around internet access, and literally right before the pandemic hit. And so we were having these great conversations, and right when the pandemic hit, we were beginning to have conversation with our school districts, we saw this shift, that the conversations we were having had a huge impact, and that our school districts were being intentional on how they were making sure that internet was going to be accessible at home. So they sent home Chromebooks, they sent home hotspots, and 3 years later, our students still have access to those things. So being able to build off of the relationships that I built as a community organizer, the relationships that Paris, who was our president and CEO, built while she was doing education programming, we've been able to expand that work even more. I would say there's 2 school districts in our county that come to us for everything, every little problem. They are there. They want to know how to better engage families, how to do right by students. And so we have been helping and growing in this equity work, pushing for more equity audits. And I'm excited to share that we have a new relationship that we're cultivating with a school district that has Black and brown students who don't get seen, and whose families aren't acknowledged, aren't engaged, and they just hired their first Black principal at the middle school, and we were one of the first agencies she's called. And we're putting together affinity groups, and we're gonna put together a Black and brown parent alliance that will be hosted at our office starting in the new year, where we'll be able to share and provide a lot of what everyone was talking about today. So I just thank you for the 3 affiliates for sharing today. I'm definitely inspired, and I want to be able to connect so that we can bring some of these best practices back home.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ramsey Sabri. I'm the Director of Education and Empowerment at the Louisville Urban League, and I was flown up to New York City to partially brag on our outgoing president, Sadiqa Reynolds, and the awesome and phenomenal work that we've been doing in Louisville. The other thing is to talk about the charge that I have as the new director. I still call myself new, but I've been in about a year. So, long story short, Sadiqa has led us in an intensive effort to expand our education portfolio, our education projects, initiatives. It encompasses community partners, our local school system, Jefferson County Public Schools, different youth service providers and organizations that have young people that attend their out-of-school time programs and youth development programs, and of course, our families. So when I say families, I'm talking about the parents, I'm talking about the children, I'm talking about the other adults that go to provide that caregiver network, and make sure that these young people, these children, have an opportunity to combat the learning loss and the academic achievement gap that even existed before COVID. So long story short, the Louisville Urban League has raised over $16 million to provide a plethora of services to our young people and our families. This includes 2,000 intensive tutoring slots that includes math and reading, and there are slots for intensive ACT preparation for our high school students. They are rotating, so the student comes in, they get their tutoring, they get their score, they roll out. This is integrated into our Project Ready services. Project Ready, we've expanded from, I think we had around 40 slots last year to 200 slots this year. In Street Academy, which is our middle school program, we've expanded to 120 slots. We funded 5 navigators so that when families come to the Urban League and they can't find the resources they need in our education, jobs, justice, health, and housing, we have navigators who know our community and know the resources in our community so that they can use those navigators to find the resources they need. Additionally, the education team has expanded. When I came on, it was literally 2 of us. We have expanded to 9 people to get this work done. And so that goes into my charge. So as the I said it again, right? As the education director, I am responsible for making this happen. I feel very supported by my affiliate. And also I'm joined by Aisha Hayes Taylor, who has, this was when the stuff got, I don't want to cuss. When things got rough, Aisha was there to help me out, and she is also going to be, I don't know if I should say that. I should say it. So Aisha, so part of the money that we raised will actually go into the Louisville Urban League being a minority stakeholder in a premier tutoring service provider. And so and Aisha is the owner, the majority stakeholder. So long story short, I got a lot of work to do. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I just want to take a moment to embrace and to take in and to breathe in the power that's in this room. I mean, not just the fundraising capabilities, but obviously the programmatic, the results-driven folks who are here and folks who are really committed to this work. So I am empowered. I am invigorated to be in this space amongst you all. I'm happy to be learning from you, learning with you, and being in partnership in that space. And so I am the person who is going to stand between you and lunch and whatever other plans you have for today. So I will keep it brief. But as we close out, I do want to thank each and every one of you for attending this convening, from being engaged in this space, and from learning with and from each other. I think one of the important things that we learned today is the power of relationships. And I think that the work moving across the continuum from the stakeholder circles to the concerted effort that the coalition work is supposed to be helping to drive, focused on moving the needle on particular education equity issues. I think that we can see that the power of relationships is necessary and fundamental in every single aspect of that. And so as you enjoy the hot lunch today, I hope that you will join me in building and growing the relationships that we have in this room and the ones that are yet to be formed. So once again, thank you all for coming out today. I wish you all safe travels to wherever your final destination is. And once again, just happy to have you all here. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy lunch.